Thanks so much, Diana. I'm also going to race like everyone else. I'm also a little ill, so I hope I don't splutter. And I also sound much deeper than normal. So hopefully that lends authority to this. So I'm going to talk very quickly about a project that we're doing at VU. We've been doing it for a few years, but it's about to take a big sort of step forward. And it's about mapping program learning outcomes using our learning management system to specific assessment items. And I'm going to talk about what that means in a second. So the basic background problem that most Australian universities are encountering right now is that we are trying to make our program learning outcomes more visible to students, more meaningful to students, and we're trying to trace how well students are progressing in terms of their attainment of program learning outcomes. A lot of people are talking about the shift to program level learning. One of the things I think is really important to remember is that we have been trying to do program level learning for decades, but we do it in a really complex way. So what we do at the moment is we map program learning outcomes down to units, those units or subjects. Those units have their own learning outcomes, so unit learning outcomes. We tend to map those unit learning outcomes to assessment tasks, and then we tend to break assessment tasks down into assessment criteria or into individual questions within a quiz or test-based thing. That makes it really complex when we're trying to think about the relationship between program learning outcomes on the one hand and student attainment in assessment tasks on the other. And if we're trying to figure out that connection, figure out what students are learning relative to program learning outcomes, we kind of have to trace things all the way back up through these steps. And anyone who's ever been involved in professional accreditation has maybe even done that, where you're looking at individual assessment tasks from students and you're trying to make the claim that this thing here, because they got a credit score for that criteria, is actually evidence of their attainment for a program learning outcome. So the project that I'm involved in involves mapping program learning outcomes directly down to the learning management system. I'll give you a pause to take on board that incredible animation. I just do that again. Who needs Gen AI? What does it look like in the system? Basically, inside the LMS, what we are doing is mapping specific assessment criteria in rubrics or questions in any quiz type thing. They're the two types of assessment tasks that our learning management system supports, but we can deliver them in all sorts of different ways. But essentially, those assessment tasks remain the same. A teacher still assesses, for example, a report against a number of criteria, but we can map through a simple process which of those criteria relate to specific program learning outcomes. And then what the LMS does is it, using an algorithm that we can have some level of control over, at the end of a subject, extracts what the criteria for different assessment tasks that we've mapped to a particular program learning outcome. It extracts them and generates a grade for that student in terms of their attainment of the program learning outcome at the end of that subject. So that's the thing that the system is doing for us after we've mapped it. What are the outputs of this? They are really potentially powerful. So for teachers, when you get to the end of a subject as a teacher, you're used to looking at the results of your students, right? The overall result, their results in each assessment task. And you get from that an understanding of how they've succeeded against those assessment tasks and in the unit overall. What the system now does, our LMS now does, is it generates a second gradebook, and that gradebook gives individual students grades against the different program learning outcomes that have been mapped to that subject. So as a teacher, you can see at the end of the subject, how well is your design of assessment suite or design of assessment tasks gone, how have students achieved against them, and at the same time, you can switch to a different view and you can see how students have gone against program learning outcomes. So as a teacher, you can see how your students are going, how your subject is going against program learning outcomes. For students, they have a user progress tab inside the LMS that they can look at any point in time. They can already see their progress against all sorts of other things like their assessment tasks, like their use of content, like their use of practice quizzes or anything like that. Now they can see their progress against program learning outcomes. And in that space, they can see not just a grade sort of score against those program learning outcomes, but links back to feedback that staff have given them against assessment criteria. Those staff are not doing any new work in terms of marking their criteria. It's just because we've mapped it, the system is extracting bits of feedback and saying, this is how you're going against this program learning outcome. For internal, external stakeholders, if you saw my presentation at Herzu, which was much longer and a little slower, I said that we had in mind the building of a dashboard, that we were a work in progress was to build a dashboard tool that can look at this data at scale. And we have a proof of concept version of that that went live 2 weeks ago, which is really, really exciting for this. And that's what's in the screenshot there. So there's not much that you need to look at that for, but essentially, if you think of what you can extract from an LMS already and what you can do with that data at scale across a whole university, right, across a course, across a set of units, across a particular program learning outcome, right, we're at a point now where we can extract that data and look at it in terms of how a cohort of students are progressing over time, how a unit is doing over time, how a type of unit is doing. Yeah, so this is a really exciting step that we've just taken in this project. And my last slide, what I think this is a really powerful way of moving towards program learning program level assessment. Why do I think that? First of all, this is a way to map programs that is really intuitive and efficient. Right? It isn't integrating new technology. It's not asking teaching staff to use a new system. It's done in the existing system. And so we found it really intuitive for staff to use. The second thing is that this generates, especially now we have the dashboard, this generates a living map of a program, all the way down to assessment, all the way down to individual assessment items. That living map means that instead of having a design map that a course team decides to put together at a point in time, and then that gradually and immediately starts becoming out of date as little things in that program or those units change over time, this thing generates a live image of what we are mapping and what student attainment is with regard to that assessment suite. The last two things I've been thinking about a lot since Herzer, this approach supports modularity. So one of the things that I think is really important is we're trying to build coherent programs in a modular product. And instead of trying to undo that and just have simple, clear, structured programs, this thing allows us to keep complex modular programs, but extract program level data out of it and for students to see the program across that complexity. And the last thing that I want to say is everyone is talking about the need to change the culture of assessment in Australian higher education and to move towards something more programmatic or program level. And a lot of people are talking about that from a top-down perspective, right? Introduce a new project, transform the university. That's really, really, really hard to do. This project that we're doing, I think, is going to lead to cultural change, but it's going to lead to cultural change from the ground up as our basic business as usual practice shifts. That's it.